I really need to speed up the proofreading part of my workflow or something. I think I spend too much time on my translations. And I know I'm a perfectionist, but it isn't just that. Do you have any tips for controlling the perfectionism or generally making the process go faster besides using Dragon? I already do. I think I have a blog post on this. I'll include this blog post under the video for this. It's called High Speed Quality Control. So here are some of the tips that I use. So the number one key, in my opinion, let me pull this up, is to be right the first time. So when I started out, I would do like 10 drafts. It seemed like, I would do like a quick rough draft and then go over and over and over it. As I've become more skilled and more experienced, it's my opinion that actually is the worst way you can do it, even though it seems like the best way in theory. Like it seems like, oh, if I go over and over and over it, it will get better. But my opinion is that that's like saying, okay, I'm going to build a car and we're just going to throw the engine goes somewhere around there, or this goes somewhere around there. And then in the second round, we'll like fix it. Or like building a house and like just throw up the house and then we'll worry about fixing everything later. Like that's just not a really like quality inducing way, in my opinion, to translate. You also have the issue where if you make a decision in line 1, especially when you're doing a really big project, and then you're just doing this random rough draft, you can't really make use of your translation memory. You're going to end up having multiple hits like fuzzy matches, and the fuzzy match is going to be something that's only roughly translated in the first place. And so now when you have to proofread, you're not really making use of a quality translation in that fuzzy match. Now you're having to kind of reinvent the wheel over and over and over, and it makes the whole thing take forever. Dragon definitely like crazy improved my speed, but the next thing after that was proofreading smarter and just, having a better workflow. And the number one thing I did was if I didn't understand something, I stopped and I made the right decision right then and made sure that my decisions were consistent. The other thing I did is if I'm going along and I'm like, you know what, I decided to use this word up in line 2, but now that I'm, in line 35, I actually think it should be this. I will stop at that point instead of saying, oh, I'll fix it on proofreading. I will stop at that point, go back and fix them all, and then continue. Because I want to assume that whatever line I'm on, if I'm on like line 50, everything before that should be perfect. It should be 100% perfect. And when I go back to proofread, it should only just be like, oops, I forgot a comma, oops, I forgot a period, not any sort of like deep fixing, So sorry, I'm like getting a little bit off topic, but when I work for an agency and they send me a really crappy translation, I charge my fixed rate, which is typically just a tiny bit less than my translation rate. I let them know like, hey, you need to give this another proofreader. So think about that, right? Like I let them know, like, I know I was the proofreading step, but because there are so many changes were made, there needs to be another proofreader now, right? So if it had just been a good translation and a proofreader, it would be ready to go to the client, but that's not the case. So you don't want to create that situation for yourself. You're basically giving yourself a crappy translation and then asking yourself to fix it, then asking yourself to proofread it. Just do it right the first time. I promise that it will be a game changer. I do have sort of a limit. Like if it takes me longer than about 5 minutes to find a term or something, I will just sort of make a note, highlight it, and move on. I'm not going to spend half an hour looking for something when it might just be clarified later on in the document. So here are some other tips that I use. So proofreading backwards. And this applies mostly for things like names and numbers where your brain wants to see the same thing. Like you see a name with like a bunch of different letters, a name, maybe you've never seen it before. Your brain will want to see that in the target text, and so it will force you to see it. If you check out this article, it kind of goes over, why our brains do this sort of expectation sort of proofreading. But if you proofread the names and numbers backwards, it will help force your brain out of that sort of situation. And it will also make proofreading those things much, much faster. Copy paste, don't rekey. This is another one that's huge. even though it feels like it takes longer to go and copy someone's name and paste it, if you do that and you do it the whole time, you no longer have to proofread that name. So just think about that for a second. Like if you had a giant list of names, you know, as long as you're copying and pasting, like it's impossible for there to be different letters, right? So you don't have to proofread that. So I've noticed that when I'm proofreading, like for example, you know, I do a lot of medical, so like drug names, which sometimes I'm just totally, they're brand new drugs. I'm not familiar with it, right? So it could be an L or an I there, like who knows? So I copy and paste it, and then I know when I get to drug name, in my head I just go drug name and move on. I don't proofread the actual name of the drug. So it doesn't slow me down as much. So I hope that makes sense. And then these are just talking about automated quality assurance tools. So again, I'll include this in the notes underneath the video. But this is, I highly recommend these tips beyond using Dragon. And it should speed you up like to a pretty crazy extent, almost like to the level that Dragon speeds you up. Because proofreading can like be a really significant part of our time, you know, as translators.